Good morning, y'all. The tropics just handed us a meaningful update overnight, and I want to get straight into it because a tropical wave that had been sitting out over the open Atlantic for the past several days has now officially crossed into the Caribbean Sea, and it is moving fast. I want to walk y'all through exactly where this wave is right now, how quickly it is moving, and why that speed actually matters, which islands and countries are going to feel it first, what the National Hurricane Center is currently saying about its development potential, and what else is out there behind it, because this wave is not traveling alone. It is one of 4 separate tropical waves the Hurricane Center is watching as we open the month of August, which is traditionally one of the busiest stretches of the entire hurricane season. Let's start with the wave itself, because the location and the motion here are the 2 numbers I want y'all locking in on first. As of the latest tropical weather discussion out of the National Hurricane Center in Miami, this system has been repositioned along 66 to 67 degrees west longitude, south of about 17 to 19 north latitude, based on a combination of surface observations, satellite imagery, and wave guidance data. That puts it right in the eastern Caribbean, generally south of Puerto Rico, and it is moving westward at a genuinely brisk 15 to 25 knots, which works out to somewhere around 17 to 29 miles per hour. I want y'all to understand why that forward speed is worth mentioning specifically, because a lot of tropical waves crossing the Atlantic plod along at a relatively modest 10 to 15 knots, giving forecasters and residents a longer runway to watch how the system behaves before it reaches populated areas. This wave is moving noticeably faster than that, which means it is going to cover a lot of ground and reach a lot of different islands and countries in a shorter window of time than a slower moving system would. The convection associated with this wave, meaning the actual clusters of showers and thunderstorms riding along with it, has been observed stretching from around 15 to 19 north and between about 66 and 70 west, putting the heaviest activity generally along a corridor that includes the waters and airspace near Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica, with reports specifically describing scattered showers and thunderstorms occurring between Jamaica and eastern Cuba, and near the Windward Passage, which is the stretch of water separating the eastern tip of Cuba from the northwestern coast of Haiti. Because this wave is moving as quickly as it is, forecasters expect it to continue pushing rapidly westward across the remainder of the Caribbean basin, which means the shower and thunderstorm activity currently affecting the eastern Caribbean this morning is going to be sliding into the central and western Caribbean, including the waters around Jamaica, Haiti, and eastern Cuba, within a very short window, likely by tonight into tomorrow, given the pace this system has been holding. I also want to bring in what folks across the islands are already experiencing directly, because this is not just a satellite and model story. This wave is producing real on-the-ground weather right now. The Barbados Meteorological Services issued their forecast for the island, specifically noting that a tropical wave would be approaching and then affecting the island through the day, bringing partly cloudy conditions building toward increasingly cloudy skies with scattered light to moderate showers, particularly across the western and northwestern districts, along with building easterly to southeasterly breezes and increasing swells offshore. Similarly, marine and aviation forecasts covering Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands have described a tropical wave moving across the Caribbean Sea, continuing to bring showers and thunderstorms across the regional waters and passages, along with a moderate risk of rip currents developing across a wide stretch of Puerto Rico's coastline, from the northwest around to the southeastern beaches, plus Vieques, Culebra, and St. Croix. So even before we get to any question of tropical cyclone development, this wave has already been the dominant weather story across a meaningful chunk of the eastern Caribbean over the past day, and it is going to remain that way as it continues its rapid trek westward. Now let's talk about the question everybody actually wants answered, which is whether this wave or any of the other systems currently out there is expected to develop into an organized tropical cyclone. As of the most recent tropical weather outlook issued by the National Hurricane Center, the answer for the entire North Atlantic, Caribbean Sea, and Gulf is straightforward. Tropical cyclone formation is not expected during the next 7 days. I want to say that plainly and clearly, because I never want anybody watching this video to walk away thinking a hurricane is bearing down on them when that is not what the official guidance actually says. This wave, fast-moving and already producing real showers and thunderstorms across the islands, is still not currently expected to organize into a depression or storm within the coming week. But I also do not want y'all to hear not expected to develop and mentally check out of watching this system, because the impacts I just described, the rain, the gusty winds, the rip currents, are real regardless of whether this wave ever earns a name, and because tropical forecasting outlooks get updated constantly as new data comes in, meaning this assessment is always subject to revision if the environment ahead of this wave changes. Let me explain briefly why forecasters are not currently flagging this fast-moving wave for development, because I think the reasoning actually connects directly back to that same forward speed I mentioned earlier. A tropical wave moving quickly across the Caribbean in the range of 20 to 25 knots, the way this one has been at times, generally has less time sitting over any one stretch of ocean to organize a closed, sustained circulation before it moves on to the next patch of water. Organizing into a tropical depression requires persistent thunderstorm activity to consolidate around a common center over a period of at least a day or more. And a system racing across the basin at nearly 30 miles an hour is working against its own clock in a way that a slower moving, more lingering disturbance would not be. That is not a guarantee this wave stays disorganized all the way across the basin, since forward speed can change as steering patterns evolve, but it is part of why the Hurricane Center's current assessment leans toward continued disorganization rather than development over the coming days. Now, here's the piece of the story I really want to spend time on, because I do not think most tropical updates capture just how much is actually happening across the Atlantic Basin at once right now. This Eastern Caribbean wave is not the only system on the board. The Hurricane Center's Saturday update flagged a total of 4 separate tropical waves being tracked simultaneously as August got underway. Beyond the fast-moving Eastern Caribbean wave we have been discussing, there is an Eastern Atlantic tropical wave, analyzed along roughly 21 to 22 degrees west longitude, stretching from about 4 north to 19 or 20 north, moving westward at a more modest 10 to 15 knots, with scattered moderate convection spread out along its length. There is also a Central Atlantic tropical wave, sitting along about 45 to 46 degrees west, south of 16 to 17 north, moving westward at 15 to 20 knots, with scattered moderate to isolated strong convection observed in its environment. And finally, there's a 4th wave, the northern portion of a Western Caribbean tropical wave, positioned along about 87 degrees west, south of 18 north, moving westward at 15 to 20 knots, though this one currently shows no significant organized convection associated with it. 4 separate tropical waves spread out across essentially the entire width of the Atlantic Basin from the Eastern Ocean all the way through the Western Caribbean, all being tracked by Hurricane Center forecasters at the exact same time, is a genuinely busy tropical picture, even with none of them currently carrying development odds. I think this 4-wave picture is actually the most important takeaway from today's update, more so than any single wave's individual track, because it tells us something meaningful about where we sit in the broader seasonal calendar. Meteorologists have specifically described the start of August as a traditionally busy time of the hurricane season, and having this many separate tropical waves lined up and moving through the basin simultaneously is exactly the kind of pattern that shows up as the Atlantic transitions out of its comparatively quieter early to midsummer stretch and into the period when Cabo Verde-type systems, storms originating from waves coming off the West African coast, become an increasingly important part of the season's story. None of these 4 waves individually looks poised to develop over the next several days, according to current guidance, but a basin producing this many separate disturbances at once, with more presumably following behind them off the African coast in the days ahead, is a basin that deserves daily monitoring rather than a once-a-week check-in from anybody living across the Caribbean, the Gulf, or the southeast U.S. coastline. Let me get specific about what I want different groups of y'all doing with this information, because the fast-moving Eastern Caribbean wave in particular is going to be reaching different areas on a fairly tight timeline. If you are anywhere across Barbados, the Windward Islands, or the broader Eastern Caribbean, you have already been feeling this wave's effects today with scattered showers, building swells, and increasing winds, and that activity is going to continue sliding westward through the day. If you are across Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or the Dominican Republic, expect continuing periods of showers and thunderstorms along with that moderate rip current risk I mentioned earlier, so beach and water plans over the next day or two should factor that hazard in directly. And if you're across Jamaica, Haiti, or eastern Cuba, including the waters near the Windward Passage, this wave is going to be arriving in your area on a notably fast timeline given its forward speed, likely bringing scattered showers and thunderstorm activity your way within the coming day or so. So I would not wait until the rain actually starts to check your local forecast office's latest update. For everybody across the wider basin, including the Gulf Coast and the southeast United States, I want you factoring in that this fast-moving Eastern Caribbean wave is just one of 4 separate systems currently being tracked, with the Central Atlantic wave and the Eastern Atlantic wave both still working their way westward behind it, and the Western Caribbean wave already positioned out near 87 west, without much organized convection yet. None of these are flagged for development over the coming week, but that picture can and does change as these systems continue their individual journeys. So this is exactly the kind of stretch where checking the tropical weather outlook once in the morning and calling it done for the day is not enough. I check it multiple times daily during a stretch like this one, and I want y'all doing the same, especially anybody with outdoor plans, travel plans, or maritime activities anywhere across this basin over the coming week to 10 days. I also want to spend a minute explaining why a fast-moving wave like this one actually presents a distinct forecasting challenge compared to a slower system, because I think it is a genuinely useful thing to understand rather than just a passing detail. When a tropical wave crawls across the ocean at 10 or 12 knots, forecasters and residents alike get a longer window to watch its satellite presentation evolve, to see whether convection is consolidating or falling apart, and to issue updated guidance well ahead of any potential impacts reaching land. A wave racing along at 20 to 25 knots compresses that entire observation window dramatically. The gap between a wave showing up clearly on satellite imagery over open water and that same wave's associated showers and thunderstorms reaching an inhabited coastline can shrink from several days down to less than 24 hours, which is exactly the situation playing out with this system as it crosses from the eastern Caribbean toward Jamaica, Haiti, and eastern Cuba. This is part of why I keep emphasizing that a system like this one deserves more frequent check-ins rather than fewer, even though it is not currently flagged for tropical cyclone development, because the window between an updated forecast discussion and actual weather arriving at your specific location is simply shorter than it would be with a more sluggish system. I also want to give you all a sense of what typically happens next in a pattern like this one, since understanding the broader rhythm of the season helps put today's four-wave picture in context. Historically, once the basin starts producing this kind of steady conveyor belt of tropical waves rolling off the African coast and crossing the Atlantic in relatively close succession, that pattern tends to continue and often intensify as August progresses, with additional waves forming behind the ones we are watching today, one after another as the monsoon trough over West Africa remains active through the peak of the season. Not every wave in a sequence like this develops, and in a below-average season shaped by this year's strengthening El Niño, plenty of them will likely continue moving through disorganized, the same way this morning's fast-moving Caribbean wave and its three counterparts currently are. But the sheer frequency of waves entering the basin during this stretch of the calendar is exactly why forecasters treat early August as the opening chapter of the season's most active period, rather than an extension of the comparatively quieter early summer months. It is worth noting that fast-moving Eastern Caribbean waves like this one are not unprecedented in producing real impacts even without early development odds attached to them. Back in 2021, Tropical Storm Fred began its life as a tropical wave first noted by the Hurricane Center in early August, and within about a week of crossing the Lesser Antilles and entering the Caribbean, that same disturbance organized into a tropical storm that ultimately affected the Greater Antilles and the southeastern United States, contributing to several fatalities and over $1 billion in damage. I bring that up not to suggest today's wave is following an identical path, since every system's environment is different and this morning's official outlook still shows no development expected, but simply as a reminder of why forecasters keep a close, continuous watch on fast-moving Caribbean waves throughout this stretch of the season, even when the 7-day outlook reads as quiet. So here is where I will leave things this morning. The wave that has entered the Caribbean is real, it is moving fast, and it is already producing tangible impacts, rain, wind, and rip currents, across a stretch of islands running from Barbados through Puerto Rico and on toward Jamaica and eastern Cuba. It is not currently expected to develop into a tropical cyclone over the next 7 days, according to the National Hurricane Center's latest outlook. And I want that message delivered clearly, so nobody watching this panics unnecessarily. But it is traveling as one of 4 separate tropical waves currently spread across the Atlantic basin, arriving right at the traditional start of the season's busiest stretch. And that combination is exactly why I'm not treating this as a forgettable, one-day story. I will be watching all 4 of these waves closely as they continue their individual paths across the basin, and if any of them shows real signs of organizing, whether that is this fast-moving Eastern Caribbean system or one of the 3 following behind it, I will have an update out for y'all immediately. In the meantime, if you are anywhere across the path I described this morning, please stay tied into your local forecast office rather than relying on a single national headline, since the exact timing and intensity of showers and thunderstorms can shift meaningfully from one forecast cycle to the next, with the system moving this quickly. If this update helped you understand exactly what just happened in the tropics overnight, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. And share this video with anybody you know across the Caribbean who needs to know what is heading their way over the next day or two. I will keep tracking the basin for y'all, and I will see y'all in the next one. Stay weather aware, and I love y'all.